Awela the Savage. Jungle Fiction. Chapter 1. The Snake Lair. A man slowly passed through the jungle of Awela, a very dangerous passage. He was looking for something, as friends had told him about the monkey stone. But soon there was screaming, and a few days later, he was found, hanging dead at a rope, tied to a tree. There was no hope in any of these spheres of the Awela jungle. It was a place of doom. No one knew exactly what the dangers were in this jungle, but it had something to do with the monkey stone, a desired stone by many. Awela was a young priest who had built a small temple in the east side of the Awela jungle, but a few days after it was done he was murdered in a mysterious way. Could any human live in such a place? No one exactly knew. It was like the jungle itself took care of its secrets. It was a jungle where animals were the rulers, and not human beings. And if there would be any tribes in the jungle there, then it would be still hidden. Maybe they would live in the underground, and they would know about the secret of this jungle, while living so close to the animals, that they had to be like them. Some researchers once went to the jungle of Awela to try to do some tests with their professor, but they also got all murdered in a mysterious way. It looked like no one could pierce this jungle. However, there was one man who could live there. He lived among the animals, as in a unity. This man was a savage from birth. Once he was a foundling, but monkeys raised him. He knew about the secrets of the monkey stone, as the monkeys taught him about it. He knew that he could never bring the stone out of the jungle to the city, as then the monkeys would kill him. But as he was growing up he became stronger, and the monkeys started to fear him more and more. Often he had bloody fights with them, as he wanted to break free out of their bondages. One day, he killed the leader of the monkeys, a large gorilla. It was a fight on life or death. From that day on he wanted to get closer to other animals of the jungles, animals against which the monkeys always protected him. But now he was old enough to be free. Many of the monkeys respected him, but to some he became an outcast. He had to be on his guard, as some of the powerful monkeys were very jealous at him. It was a certain python who wanted to eat the man since his birth, but the monkeys always protected him against the tall snake. It was a very large one, very big. Now the man was seeking for revenge, for he always had nightmares about this snake. He found a dagger once in the jungle, and now he was swimming in the jungle river in search for the snake. He could smell the snake from a distance, so he knew where the snake was. But when he came there were more snakes, and they started to attack him. It was a bloody fight, in which he finally killed 30 snakes. He raised the lifeless bodies of the snakes above his head, and threw them in the river, one by one. Crocodiles came to eat the snakes, and the river was full of blood, all of a sudden. The man dived into the river to wash himself in the blood, as his senses told him that it would make him more immune against snakes. It was his wish to have friendship with the snakes, but that was almost impossible in the jungle of Awela, as the snakes were very aggressive. He had some friendship with certain crocodiles, and they feared him, but with the snakes he still had problems. It was like they were now looking for revenge, since he killed 30 of them. His hairs were long, and his body slender and sly. He had some scars, but these were small, some a bit taller, but not too visible. Wounds could heal well in the spheres of the Awela jungle. One day, he wanted to win the hearts of the wild cats, but he knew instinctively that he had to be very careful, even when they would act friendly. It was like he could smell their lust for blood. Chapter 2. King of the Lions. Once one of the lions came into the snake lair in the night, while the man was sleeping. The lion wanted to have an easy meal in the night, but the 2 snakes went in speed after the lion to bite its head off. It was a quick job from the snakes, and they didn't make too much noise. When the man woke up that morning, he saw the headless body of the lion, and he immediately knew what happened. Also, when he was outside, the lair, lions used to attack him, and although he could handle them more and more, sometimes his snake friends had to speed to the fight to care for it. The man wanted to become a skilled lion wrestler, but most of all, he wanted to be their friend. The lion wrestlings happened more often, and soon the man could dominate them at his own. It was like playing with fire, but he didn't have another choice. The lions started to fear him more, and they started to become sensitive to his signals. He was like the Lion King now. He knew he still couldn't trust them, as they were wild animals. But more and more he desired to develop a friendship with them. He knew that maybe it would be impossible, but it was a challenge to him. The two snakes of the lair he could trust, so why not some lions? But first he needed to be very careful. They first needed to prove him that they wouldn't kill him in any circumstance. Zeatroy was an Apeman living in a cave not so far away from the snake lair. He was like a huge hairy man, very sly. He became curious about what was all happening. He was very caring to the man. He often brought him meat and weapons. Zeatroy taught the man how he could call for eagles. These eagles were very big, and could easily bring them to faraway places. Zeatroy taught the man many more secrets of the jungle of Awela, and he even called the man Awela. Then he first put his fists to his own chest, and then directed his finger to the man, and said, "You, Awela." He had a very dark and low voice, almost soft roaring. Zeatroy also taught Awela how to fight and wrestle against the darkest animals, and how to have friendship with them. Awela started to like Zeatroy more and more, as he never had a friend like this. They found a way to communicate with each other very well, and Awela tried to explain about the monkey stone. Zeatroy explained him that it was originally his stone, but the monkeys stole it from him. In the night, Awela showed him the way to the monkey camp, where they hid the monkey stone. One of the gorillas held the stone. It was the new leader of the monkeys, and he was always very rude towards Awela. The leader was sleeping, holding the stone close to his body. Awela and Zeatroy tried to take the stone very carefully, but suddenly the gorilla leader woke up. He started calling the others, and a bloody fight arose. The fight was so hard, and took so long, that finally the two snake friends came to help Zeatroy and Awela. They killed the new gorilla leader, and then the other gorillas all went away. The stone they left behind, and Zeatroy took it in his arms, like a baby. Zeatroy knew many more secrets of the stone, as it was originally his. He explained that a sorcerer once made it for him, after Zeatroy saved his life. It was a stone of communication, by which Zeatroy could communicate with all animals. By this it could stop, or just prevent many fights and wars between animals. This was how Zeatroy became a beast master, as he could be the perfect mediator between the animals. Zeatroy was glad the stone was back now, so that one day there was, like an invasion of gorillas, and some of them were so big and huge, and so strong and skilled, that they were even able to kill Awela's two big snakes. Awela tried to escape the bloody fight, since he found out about their death, but the gorillas were faster than him, and captured him. Many of the gorillas he didn't recognize. They brought him to a gorilla camp, deep in the jungle. It was like Awela couldn't breathe, as they kept him in a tight grip. Fortunately, Awela had learned from Zeatroy how to call for the big eagles, but this time they didn't come. Maybe it was because of the gorillas making too much noise. But after a while he saw two lions in the distance coming closer. He remembered these lions. They were friends of Zeatroy. Some gorillas became panicked, but other gorillas stirred up each other for the coming fight. It became a horrible fight. Awela didn't know if the lions would keep him alive, as they always kept him at a distance. The lions slayed most of the gorillas, and the others left the camp. The lions were very friendly towards Awela. They took Awela to their den. Soon it was like they had replaced the part of the two snakes. They would protect Awela by their lives. But long their friendship wouldn't last, for in a night, so many gorillas surrounded the den, and they were so big and huge like Awela never saw before. He didn't know any of them, and he thought that maybe they came from far away, as their senses would tell what had happened to their brothers. It was like the gorillas' revenge, and it was like an army this time. Some of them were so enormous like beasts, and when they grasped the two lions, they started to eat them alive, leaving Awela in fear. But some others took Awela with them. It was a long travel, across rivers. They brought Awela to a gorilla village, deep in the jungle. The gorillas here were like beasts, but some of them acted very friendly towards Awela. It was like they could recognize Awela's feelings towards them, feelings of love, wanting nothing but friendship. Chapter 3. Stronger than lions. There were some huge Apeman living here, looking a bit like Zeetroy, although some were even huger. Some said, "You, king of gorillas," but then Awela smiled. These gorilla beasts he couldn't handle, as they were stronger than lions. It was like the Apeman were repressed by the monstrous gorillas. And soon Awela found out that they were their prisoners and slaves. They couldn't leave the village, as the beasts guarded everything carefully. The Apeman were looking for a strong leader to take them out, someone who would be the king of the gorillas. Some of the gorillas noticed the friendship between Awela and the Apeman, and they weren't glad with it. Especially when the Apeman talked about him as Gorilla King. Awela knew he had to be on his guard now. One day a huge gorilla, who also looked like a sort of giant Apeman, came to Awela's tent. Soon Awela found out that he was the present Gorilla King. Other gorillas came and took Awela to a field in the center of the village. They also brought the Gorilla King there. "You Gorilla King?" the giant Apeman asked. And then he started to laugh and hit on his chest with his fist. He did this so hard that after a while blood was coming forth from his chest. Then the other gorillas who had surrounded the field started to applaud. "Fight me," the giant roared. It became a long and bloody battle. The giant hit Awela very hard. Awela didn't have any chance against him, and when he slammed Awela to a tree, Awela lost consciousness. Later he awoke in his tent. There were other things in the village Awela didn't like. First he was thinking about an escape, but later he wanted to help In the king's dagger, there was a stone called the Gorilla Stone. It was a flat stone, like a spot. Awela gave it to one of the Apeman, and left. He called for some big eagles, and they brought him to the place where he came from. He decided to live in Zeetroy's cave, as he missed him very much. He hoped that he could live in peace here, and to find new friends. Sometimes panthers came to his place, and he used to feed them. It was like the panthers, in a sense, thought that he was Zeetroy, the one they loved. There was so much warmth in this place, and often animals from far came here. It was like Awela more or less took the place of Zeetroy. In a sense it was so easy now to have friendship with the most dangerous animals. To him, that was the heritage of Zeetroy. One day Awela found a secret doorway in Zeetroy's cave. There were drawings of flowers on the walls of the tunnel, and it was leading to the underground. Awela wondered if Zeetroy knew about this. Or maybe it was his secret. In the underground all sorts of flowers were growing. There were also jewels growing in these flowers, radiating strange sorts of light. The jewels looked like small hearts, beating and pulsating. They were alive. They were like organs. They were carrying a strange smell, and it was like they were drawing in his mind. It was like an underground paradise, with all these fields full of jungle flowers. There were also some rivers and lakes here with strange fishes. Suddenly Awela discovered a place, like a sort of cave full of monkey stones, and also gorilla stones. There were a lot of spiders in this place, and the spiders looked very dangerous. But they didn't harm Awela. It was like Zeatroy's protection was over him. Awela took some of the stones, and threw them in the waters. Close to the cave there was a stairways downstairs, and when Awela went down he found other treasure rooms, full of jungle jewels. But when he touches one of these jewels something strange is happening. Fences of strange shiny twisted stone, or bone decorated by flowers, and strange pulsating jewels, and jewelry come down like prison bars to block all the doorways around him. He's now locked up. A strange smell is spreading throughout the place where he is in. He hears heavy breathing, like there is a beast or volcano close to him. So you want to steal from my property, someone is roaring. Behind the bars an enormous dragon-like black creature appears, spitting fire and smoke, while ice rays are coming out of its nose. It has dark red eyes. Months of imprisonment follow. He gets strange meat to eat, like the meat of strange spiders and other unknown creatures. Sometimes the dragon-like creature is roaring, "I am the ruler of the jungle." High on a wall, in front of him, above the bars an enormous sword hangs, decorated by jewels, flowers and other jewelry. Awela desires the sword, as it may be a way for him to break the bars and defeat the dragon, but something inside him, like his own instincts, tell him that he better cannot touch anything like that, as it would trigger something he might not be able to handle. In some corners skeletons lay down, and also mummified creatures like ashes. He knows that many came here before him and didn't survive the tricks of this place. He knows how dangerous it is to touch anything of worth here. It is like the meat is making him stronger, but he's also aware that it can be to breed him into something. Maybe he is of use to the dragon. By digging into the ground, Awela found an old dagger. It had some flat stones on it. Jungle stones. By the dagger he tries to cut an opening in one of the fences, and after a while he succeeds. Before him lies a path of shimmering jungle stones, like tiles, but he knows it's too dangerous to step on them. Awela throws the dagger towards the heart of the dragon, but he misses. Then the dragon spits fire, and just in time Awela can dive away. Awela grasps his dagger again, and throws the dagger again. This time it hits the dragon, but then it falls away. Then the egg opens up, and Apeman are coming forth. Awela climbs on the bony white bench, and the women look him hopeful into the eyes. "Are you coming to set us free?" they ask. The Apeman look very dizzy. They just came out of the giant egg. But the dragon is coming closer to the bench. By the bench they can all jump on the enormous beast, who crashed down. They enter through his enormous mouth. Then Awela asks about the bleeding stone, what does it mean? The women tell him that it is the secret of their power. It was once planted there by a sorcerer, the one they lived with, and the dragon couldn't do anything about it. The bleeding stone would attract someone who would finally lead them out. And that one was Awela. They had waited for this for hundreds and hundreds of years, but the bleeding stone kept them young and powerful. In the fallen beast, they made a new living. The meat here was always growing, so they had always enough, and with the bones it was the same, so they could build it forth. Step by step they could enlarge their territory, until they had reached the bleeding stone within their domain. The dragon lost space more and more, as the bleeding stone was now activated in so many ways. But the moment came that Awela thought it was time for him to leave. Chapter 4. Zeatroy's Heritage. Awela went back to Zeatroy's cave again. He knew it was better for him not to go underground anymore, as he could stir up unknown forces he couldn't handle. The jungle here was dark enough for him. Still he saw it as a challenge to get friendship with the wild animals around him. He didn't need any stone for that, as he knew that to touch a magical stone would also bring unknown trouble. He was looking for other ways to deal with his inner request for peace and friendship. He wanted to be a savage, as a part of the jungle, and not a part of a sorcerer's club or a city. He had given the amulet to one of the women as a memory. To him, the warmth of Zeatroy's memory, and to replace him in all his friendships, was a way to return to the well of the jungle. Zeatroy had built an empire around himself mostly by experience and memory. If he had any magic, then it was the result of that, and not to replace it. It was a personal warmth between him and the animals, coming forth from a personal history by growth. Awela the Apeman. Jungle Fiction. Chapter 1. Find a Bear. They lived deep in the Awela jungle, these Apeman, not sensitive to memory, but far away in themselves, driven by unknown instincts. Awela, a young savage, was also a sort of Apeman, grew up among monkeys. But he had his memory, and treasured it. To him, only the jungle itself was more precious than the memory. The jungle always washed his memory clean, and then it came up again, stronger and purer than ever. There was a sensitivity in Awela. But he was also cruel and hard, otherwise he couldn't survive in this dark place. Often the fights he had ended up in death, and as he grew older the more he dominated the Awela jungle. Apeman feared him more than anything, and also other wild animals. He was a beast master, a lord of the jungle, and he would possess this place more than anything, as this was everything he had. The nature around him was always calling forth fights and wars, as there was a need for meat. Awela would never kill an innocent creature. He only lived by the meat of the fight. And he had enough enemies to make it happen time after time. He wasn't looking for fights, but it was like he was attracting it. He used to drink the blood of his enemies, and bath in their fluids and slimes. It was a way to deal with the horror they brought to him. Of course he had also friends, and that was still his biggest wish, also when he grew older. And these friends were a few of the darkest animals of the Awela jungle, dangerous predators. There were always some panthers around him to help him in his fights. Sometimes when he passed through the jungle, snakes would fall around his neck. They just fell out of the trees, for that reason, trying to strangle him. One of his biggest friends was Zeatroy, an Apeman, but since he had been gone, life only got heavier to Awela. Zeatroy died in a fight against gorillas, and since his death, Awela tried to replace him in his care and friendship to the most dangerous and wild animals of the Awela jungle. Zeatroy was the one who always called him Awela, like he wanted to say, the jungle is yours. It was a hard job for Awela to tread in the footsteps of his past friend. Although he had many friendship now with the greater predators of the jungle, it was also like he was attracting more predators who wanted to root him out. Was he a threat to the jungle, or just a threat to their self-made kingdoms? One day, he got attacked by an army of killer rats, something which he wouldn't forget too easy. They bit him all over by the meanest bites, and they were much faster than his dagger. It was like he couldn't control them. He could finally escape out of their grip, but his flesh was burning by the wounds. Zeatroy had taught him how to call for big eagles, so he could escape their death attack in the nick of time, but he was sick for many days, balancing between life and death. They took him to a place high in a tree where they thought he would be safe, but even in his weakness, he had to fight against a python there, one of the tallest and biggest he had ever seen. By a certain kick, and by the help of the eagles, the python finally fell out of the tree. When Awela finally went away from the tree, he met a group of bears, who took care of him. He was still very weak, but he had to search for food. The bears were very friendly to him, and it was like he could trust them very well. Many times Awela thought about Zirtroy, his old friend, who always seemed to have a lot of bear friends. Maybe these bears knew Zirtroy, and maybe they could even smell or sense that Awela was his friend. In the past, most of the time Awela had to fight bears when he encountered them, or they just went away. But this was something else. Awela had problems to kill or eat something which wasn't his enemy, but sometimes the bears just took flesh from an animal who had already died. Awela was a wild one, but he used his brains and his sensitivity to friendship and love. Maybe he needed to confront the bigger animals of the jungle to see if they would be his friends or his enemies, although often these animals, like elephants and rhinoceroses, just went away. It was like they were simply ignoring him. Also, tigers often chose to run away when they saw Awela. He didn't want to follow them, as Awela thought there needed to be respect. But these animals were hunters. If Awela would choose to hunt, then he would hunt the hunters, not the hunted. But on the other hand, these animals seemed to be locked up in their instincts. Most of the time they were peaceful, but when they got hungry they were almost slaves of the hunger. And Awela could feel these instincts in himself sometimes. Awela didn't know how to be a farmer, but he was thinking about it. He was very strong in his brains. It was like he could tame his instincts by his intelligence, but at times his lusts were just stronger, even so strong that he lost all his memories. That happened one time when a deer was staring at him while he was so hungry. It was like the deer was saying, "Catch me then, you can't get me." It was like they were teasing him at times, and he had undescribable feelings then, so weird that he would almost take his bow to shoot one of them. But Awela loved deer, as they had never attacked him. It was like there was a bond of peace between them, like a union. But Awela suffered from such a hunger at times, that he thought he would lose everything. It drove him crazy, and he couldn't think straight anymore. He saw himself like riding on a deer while they were bringing him somewhere, but he felt the urge to cut its throat and eat it alive. No, Awela was shouting. Again he was balancing between life and death, and this time it was because of hunger. Was this a hallucination? He saw himself walking to a sort of farm, like a breeding, with animals between fences and in cages, and he could remember these animals. They were his enemies. And they brought forth animals who were like the same. "I rather die," Awela said to himself. When he opened his eyes, the deer stood before him, licking him. The deer gave Awela some food. He didn't know what it was, as he had never seen it before, but when he ate from it, strength was flowing through his body again. Then the deer showed him that he had to follow, and the deer led him to a secret place, where he found wealthy bushes full of food. There were more deer here, and after a long and large meal Awela fell into a satisfying sleep. It was here Awela fell into a deep pit. For when he woke up and passed through the secret place of deer, there was a trap. The pit had been covered by thin branches and a lot of leaves. Awela fell deep and hurted himself horribly. This was where the deer were waiting for, as he could see their almost smiling heads watching him from above. Awela was shouting at them, and after a while they left. "Don't leave me alone here," he shouted. Awela now knew that he couldn't trust anything anymore. He had to live with himself. For a long time, he tried to climb out of the pit, but he couldn't get any grip. But then he fell in another trap, and came into a large hall, with tall white bony walls. In the middle of the hall, there was a white platform, also bony, or like the skin of a white python. On the walls hung strange rubies, and other jewels, often in shiny red. An enormous dragon appeared. "Do we know each other?" the dragon asked in a roaring and shrieking tone. "I met a dragon before, so that might be you," Awela said. "Are you?" The dragon was a shapeshifter, a creature with demonic forces, and Awela had to be on his guard here, as nothing was what it seemed to be. To Awela it was clear the dragon didn't want to kill him immediately. What was he up to? "Dragon, what do you want from me?" Awela asked. "I want to confuse you," the dragon spoke. "But why?" Awela asked. But then the dragon left, and the cobra took Awela again in a tight grip, and moved with him, through a white bony tunnel, full of white python skin, rubies and jewels on the walls, like a strange corridor. The cobra led Awela to a large hall full of skeletons who were yelling and applauding. Awela stood on a sort of balcony. "I want you to be their king," the cobra spoke. "But I want to go back to the jungle to be free," Awela spoke. "But here are jungles too," the cobra spoke. "Here's plenty of food, and we will care that you don't have to fight for your life. You will get armies and gladiators for that. The throne is a prison, and it enslaves," Awela spoke. "I want to be free in the jungle. But do you see these ancestors here?" the cobra spoke. "They need a king. I do not know them, as I belong to the jungle." "I am Awela the Apeman," Awela said. But then the cobra got mad, and pushed Awela from the balcony by a hard hit. It was like Awela fell into fire, as the roaring mass started to eat from his flesh. In the distance he could see another balcony, and a woman stood there. "Awela," she said loud. "I have waited for you." She threw a net to him, like a spider web by which he could climb up, while shaking the skeletons away. It was like he was still in a flame, but there was ice coming forth from the woman's mouth, easing his wounds. The woman led him to a new world, behind the balcony, and they had a great time, while developing a deep friendship. But when they both got tired, and touched each other, the woman suddenly turned into the dragon. Awela was in a shock, and it was like he was melting away in a bigger flame. Awela was screaming, while he saw everything turning around him. Everything around him got taller, all of a sudden, like everything was stretching, changing and turning around. "You have the eye of the dragon," a voice spoke. "Then take it out," Awela shouted. "But it is your heart," the voice spoke. Then suddenly Awela woke up. He was still in the den of the bears. It was all a nightmare, caused by his terrible hunger. Since that day Awela became a hunter. He didn't want to have such a nightmare again. But he would only hunt the hunters. And he would start with the darkest hunters of all, the black lions. Chapter 3. Days of Destruction. He used his bears to reach the almost impenetrable realms of the black lions. Soon he became a barbarian slayer of the butchers of the Awela jungle. And this was the cause of a bloody war, in which he lost many of his bear friends. From now on he had the black lion as his enemy, and on this base he also started to hunt other predators to find some balance. He was stirring up more enemies by this, but he didn't have another choice. The meat of black lions was good in his eyes. It brought the fire into his bones. His second victims were the red panthers, who were even larger than the black lions, although they often lived in deeper secrecy than the black lions. Ziertroy had told him once that the large red panthers had caves in which they bred cattle so that they didn't need to show up too much for hunting. Awela cared for cattle, and he loved to take them out of the breedings to take them to safer places. Most of the time he brought them out of the Awela jungle to the high fields and pastures, among other cattle. He knew that cattle herds would take care of them. The man lived in a small village, near the pastures and fields, and when they entered the house Awela got some food and clothes. But Awela didn't want to have clothes. Clothes were strange to him. In a sense the man started to like Awela more and more, and they had a great time. One day the man contacted the family. They lived in a huge house, like a sort of castle, and they would first come to the man's house to see their son. There was a sort of electricity coming over Awela when he saw his mother. "Mother," he said, while putting his fists to his chest, and then directing his finger towards her. grandmother had also come, and his sister. His sister was a beautiful woman, very soft and tender. He liked her eyes, as it was like they were speaking. His sister took him in her arms, and soothed him. They brought them to their villa-like castle. Here he also saw his other grandmother. She was very old, and she had her own room in the house, where she always sat in her chair, close to a parrot. Awela liked the parrot. The parrot could even say his name. But sometimes Awela had flashes that he needed to go back to the Awela jungle. At times he didn't feel comfortable here. They taught him the language which the shepherd had started. Awela had mixed feelings. He didn't like to be among people. He wanted to be among the animals. He thought that the city was horrible. One day, he had enough of it, and went back to the jungle. He had climbed through his window, and ran for hours and hours, until he was in the Awela jungle again. He thought it would be better for him not to go to the pastures and fields anymore. After months his sister finally found him. He saw her coming in the distance, but as she got closer, she got torn apart by a bear. In full rage Awela jumped on the bear and killed it. His sister he couldn't save. She had a white band tied around her hair, and further some white torn clothes. Awela buried her with a lot of feelings, and then he tried to forget about her. But it was like her face was haunting. He couldn't get her out of his mind, and it almost drove him insane. Why would she come back to him, to the dangerous Awela jungle, because she loved him, and wanted to be with him? Or was there another reason? Was it because she wanted to be like him? Or would she try to take him back to the city? Maybe that question would never be answered. From that day on, that a bear killed his sister, he hated bears, and would destroy them whenever he could. He knew that thought and emotion wasn't fair, and he tried to stop it, but his hate was strong. Or would they have killed her, for a reason? Would she be a threat to him, or a threat to the jungle of Awela? One thing, this jungle was dangerous, and had its secrets. No one would come into the jungle to leave it alive. Only the ones who belonged to the jungle, the ones who were a part of it. Civilization was a threat to Awela, something he found and encountered in the village, and even more in the city. It was like slavery to him. One day, he saw the parrot of his family, the parrot of his grandmother, in the distance coming to him, but it got quickly killed by big eagles. It was like the jungle erased all the traces from the city. But he liked the parrot, and he hated the big eagles for what they had done. Awela spent a lot of his days after his visit to the village and the city in anger and hate. Pure bitterness was overflowing him towards humans and towards animals. He started to see the beauty of trees and flowers. Deep inside he didn't feel complete, and he didn't need any human or animal to make him complete. It was like he didn't care anymore, as everything he loved would be taken away early or later, and would leave him in pain. But what would he find in the realms of death? Only skeletons who would burn him. It was a hunger destroying him more than any hunger for food. It was ripping his soul and heart apart. Oh, how he wished he could turn back time to let all his friendships live forever. Time was cruel in his eyes, turning friendship into an enemy. Chapter 4. Zeatroy's Flowers. The walls of time had brought the worlds of his memories behind thick glass, and he wondered how he could break this glass. Or was it the jungle itself protecting him against something? Where friendship stayed too long, civilization grew like slavery. Maybe it had to be this way, that everything made place for something else. Memory had to become a bigger circle, and it would only come alive again when it would spin around. Was this the reason why he always felt like there was a snake coiling around his head? Awela knew of a place in the jungle where certain food grew, taking your mind away to let you hallucinate, grew like tall thin threads from certain flowers. It was eatable, as he learnt it from Ziertroy, but it also brought a lot of pain, and you could get very sick from it. But it would finally be a way to bring the memory alive, in a bigger spinning circle. Awela was exhausted of everything that had happened and was creeping and sliding his way to the place Ziertroy talked about. He had never been there, as it was a dangerous place. Ziertroy had made clear to him that he had to wait till he was strong enough, until he would be ready for it. This day Awela was ready. The most evil snakes attacked him, and bit him horribly. It was like they were the guards of these flowers. He had to kill them one by one, in bloody fights which would mark him for life. It brought him strange scars, but he knew it was worth it. Almost dead, he reached out to the fragile threads hanging out of these wonderful flowers. He tried to grasp them, but it was like he couldn't get it straight anymore. Everything was dizzy before his eyes, like everything was melting, stretching and turning around, changing into the thing he didn't want to see. A dragon face. There had to be another way to reach delicious true freedom. He was sliding into a river behind the beautiful garden, but the flowers also grew here. When he drank from the water, he felt and tasted that it was full of the flower seed and smells. And he started hallucinating immediately, like a ring of fire was spinning in his mind, getting bigger and tearing his brains apart. It was like so many walls of glass in his memory were breaking. He could reach out and touch, but all that he could touch was fire. It was only space. Time was but a flame, and he was like the seed. The end. Awela the Hunter. Jungle Fiction. Chapter 1. Alarm of the Bear. Awela just had built his second home. He already had the house in the tree, but now he also made a house on the ground by branches, rocks and all that he could find in the Awela jungle. It was like the earth below his feet was shaking when he sat in his new house, and he had a beautiful sight on the river in front of the house. This was what he lived for. He was proud, as it took him a long time. He also used skins and bones of slain predators, and just of the dead carcasses he found. It was like he had rebuilt life. But there was a foul odor in the air, like someone was looking for him. Awela could sense that an enormous predator was about to visit him. He could smell it, and not much later he stood eye in eye with the biggest grizzly bear he ever saw. Awela went out of his house, and saw that the bear was wounded. He took the bear in his house, and cared for it. It was the beginning of a deep friendship. His scars looked like bites of giant pythons, but Awela wasn't sure. Awela remembered that Ziertroy also had one or two of these scars, although they were a bit different than the ones of the bear. Some of the scars were like a few big dots or spots together, and some of these dots or spots were in a strange reddish color. Awela loved to look at them. They had such a strange, almost delicious smell. Awela found a way to communicate with the bear, and the bear made clear to him that he came from the underground, where a big dragon and lots of giant pythons lived. Awela knew that there were giants and dragons and beasts living underground. Maybe it was there where the bear got his scars. The bear also made clear to Awela that in the underground there was plenty of food. Because Awela lived in hunger, at times they decided to go underground. The bear took Awela to a cave, leading them underground. Soon they saw some camps there. It was like some tribes were living underground Awela didn't know anything about. But he wasn't sure. Maybe these were just ruins. But then they saw smoke coming from the camps. The bear brought Awela to a place near the camps, where there were meat-eating plants. Here a lot of good food grew, although the meat-eating plants were very dangerous. The bear made clear to Awela that his scars were from these meat-eating plants. When they wanted to get some food soon, they got into a fight against the meat-eating plants, and Awela got bitten horribly. Awela was bleeding, but when the bear bit the neck of one of the attackers, the others drew back. There was plenty of food here, but first Awela needed to stop the bleeding. A beautiful scar like the bear grew from the wound. Also the bear was a bit wounded, and felt a bit weak. Awela started feeding the bear, and then something wonderful happened. The bear started to change into a wizard. "Thank you, Awela," the wizard spoke. "I had been turned into this grizzly bear by a dragon called the Red Wizard. Only if someone with the same scar, like me, would feed me, then I would be normal again." Awela hugged the wizard, and asked him who he was. "I am the wizard of the Awela jungle," the wizard said. "This was always my place, until a dragon challenged me and my powers. He seemed to come from deeper underground." "Then why can't we search for him to defeat him?" Awela asked. But the wizard said that the dragon had unknown powers. It would be better for them to move into the depths to find their places there, and to cooperate with the dragon, as he was an unknown source vitalizing everything. Without this dragon there wouldn't be an Awela jungle. "But can't we just replace him?" Awela asked. "How would you do that?" the wizard asked. "We are but men. I have certain powers, and I have created Awela jungle, but I have used from his source, and for that I had to pay a big price. I am not a dragon." "He is." "So is he a higher and more powerful being than you are?" Awela asked. "Let me tell you this," the wizard said. "When a wizard can become a dragon, then he's above wizards, for then he's the source of wizards, like the unknown force of depths." Then the wizard brought Awela to the depths of the Awela jungle. "You see," the wizard said, "dragons are a higher race of wizards, called Orlocks. They do not have the wings of the world, but the wings of death. They can change the world, like they want it. They know the secrets of death, and the bridges between life and death." "How can we become Orlocks?" Awela asked. The wizard directed his finger to the depths below them, where there was a lake of fire, like a whirlpool. "Only those who jump in it." Then the wizard took Awela's hand, and said, "Shall we?" And then they jumped together, in the depths of fire. It was not only good food, but it also gave them hallucinations. Chapter 2. The Meat-Eating Plants. Most of the time, the Orlocks were great archers. And that was very important, for by that they could hunt the meat-eating plants from a safe distance. Coming too close to these plants, when they were still alive, would be too dangerous. Although Awela could handle the bow very well, the Orlocks taught him how he could become a great archer. The Orlocks told Awela that in history dumb Orlocks would try to kill the meat-eating plants by cutting off their tall necks by daggers or swords. But these cut-off parts then lived on as snakes. These snakes would live most of the time in the depths of the Awela jungle, waiting to have revenge. That's why the Orlocks always had to be on their guard. The meat-eating plants could only be killed by arrows. Most of the times, these plants had more heads, and when one of these heads would be kept alive, the whole plant would become a dragon. This was the reason why they had to be good archers. But some of these heads were so fast that they almost couldn't be killed. The Orlocks said that many of these dragons lived deeper underground, waiting for the days to have revenge. Everyone was in fear of these dragons and snakes. They would develop themselves in the depths of the earth to unbelievable heights and lengths. Awela was thinking if there wasn't a way to have friendship with the meat-eating plants, and maybe later with the dragons and the giant snakes. But the Orlocks said that these beings were so wild that they couldn't be trusted. They were tricksters and deceivers. They could never be trusted. It was like this war was an everlasting war. The Orlocks believed in developing their archer skills to be able to root all these dragons and snakes out. This would be a final war. If the dragons and snakes would be more skilled, it might be the end of the Orlocks. But Awela thought that if the Orlocks would move deeper underground and be better protected, then they might live in safety there. Maybe they needed to build a good fort underground, or live in stone. Or maybe the fires of the depths could separate them. But the Orlocks wanted to be greater warriors, or just die. They needed to deal with the mistakes of history. One day the dragons and giant snakes surrounded the camp of the Orlocks. Archers were on their guards to protect the camp. Also Awela and the grizzly bear were ready for the fight. It became a bloody fight, but soon they became aware of the fact that the dragons and giant snakes had another interest. They came for the meat-eating plants. They rooted them all out of the ground and took them with them. This was the main source of the Orlocks' food, so now they had to hunt other things. The dragons and giant snakes stayed more or less in the surroundings of the camp, and the Orlocks mainly became snake hunters and dragon hunters. Also Awela and the bear took part in it. But it wasn't without dangers. The Orlocks began to miss the hallucinating effects of the meat-eating plant. These hunters were called the stone throwers. Some of the meat-eating plants couldn't be killed by arrows because their skins were too hard when they were alive. These ones could only be killed by stones. But the Dranlocks also hunted other predators. Awela and the bear decided to go back to the open jungle again. Chapter 3. The Zwickyloks. In the wilderness, in the open jungle, it was good to live. Awela now knew that, whenever he was hungry, for a long time, the Orlocks and Dranlocks would always help him. He had a place to go underground, although he didn't know if they would survive the attacks of the monsters there. And Awela knew that he, himself also needed to be on his guard, for what if the monsters would come to visit him here. Sometimes he just felt the need to live in his treehouse again, high in a big tree, but he knew dragons and giant snakes could easily find him here. He tried to forget the underground, but he got plagued by nightmares many times. It was just like it didn't want to let him go. Often he thought about making a journey into the depths of the jungle with his friend, the grizzly bear, who was always at his side. He couldn't think about a better friend, although he often thought about the days he was with Zeatroy. It was like the grizzly bear was the one who had finally filled the enormous gap, the enormous emptiness, which raised up after Zeatroy's death. It was like the grizzly bear had replaced the friendship Awela had with Zeatroy, and by that Zeatroy had never really left him alone. He saw it as Zeatroy's last gift to him, as Zeatroy always had so many bear friends. And so Zeatroy stayed to be his mind friend. Awela learned that by throwing stones, he could keep dangerous predators at a distance, as he developed his skills in stone throwing. At a moment he could throw them so fast that he could almost throw holes in trees. One day, they decided to make journey into the depths of the jungle again. This time the bear led Awela to a place of meat-eating flowers and meat-eating toadstools. It was a dark place, guarded by giant spiders. They often looked like squids and octopi, and had many legs, and often only one big eye. The giant spiders were very aggressive, and they even ate each other, as there were many species. The ones with the most legs were the most powerful. They could spit fire, and even cause blinding lights, like lightning. They also could shriek the highest. Awela and the bear slayed their way through the giant spiders, and then through the meat-eating flowers and meat-eating toadstools. They came into a camp where a tribe lived called the Zwickyloks. The camp lived in deep hunger, as they couldn't defeat any of the meat-eating flowers and meat-eating toadstools. They had been kept in this prison for such a long time. They had gone so crazy of hunger that they even ate each other. They were glad that Awela had come with his grizzly bear. There was now plenty of food, since Awela and the bear slayed so many of their enemies. Awela and the bear took the Zwickyloks to the open jungle, where they could meet the sun and heal from their trauma. Awela built some houses for them, along the river where they could live. This was the first tribe who lived in the open Awela jungle. But Awela wondered if they would survive, as the open jungle had many dangers. Awela gave also his own 2 houses to the Zwikailoks, and showed them the cave of Ziertroy, where they would always have a shelter. Awela himself and the grizzly bear would go deeper into the jungle, to the places they had never been, and to the places no man had ever seen. Chapter 4. The Man in Red. The grizzly bear took Awela to a place where small monkeys lived he had never seen before. The monkeys soon became his friends. They got bitten horribly again, and after a while, they began starving from hunger. Awela was thinking that this would be the end, and he also heard the grizzly bear roaring of pain and hunger in the distance. It was a strange prison, and Awela developed many scars, who looked like those of the grizzly bear. It was like these scars were giving him strength, in a strange sense, but on the other hand, he was feeling weaker. He couldn't go on like this much more. But after a while they heard yelling. They knew that voice. It was the Apeman. He came to set the grizzly bear and Awela free, but it became a long and bloody fight. The Apeman brought them both back to his cave, and the Apeman promised he would take good care of them. They had to live deep in the cave of the Apeman, as they were afraid of another attack. But the Apeman would protect them. Awela had a lot of nightmares, but the Apeman always soothed him. In so many ways, he was like Ziertroy, and Awela felt safe with him, although he wanted to become stronger. He knew he had to learn from the Apeman to survive. There were so many unknown dangers Awela didn't know anything about. The Apeman brought them to unknown fruit bushes, with delicious small berries. The Apeman knew a lot of hidden and secret places in the jungle, and they often went on a journey with him to discover new species. It was by these new friendships that Awela started to get hope again. He knew that by his memory, they would be always connected, in life and in death. Death was still something which Awela didn't understand very well, but the Apeman explained a lot to him about it. These were like delicious footprints on his heart, leading him inside all the possibilities of the jungle. Death was just the transformation, like food was, a journey to the insides of the earth, into the depths of the jungle. Still Awela had the thought that he wanted to build a bridge between life and death. The Apeman showed him that the scars were the footprints of death, keeping him connected to his past friends. They could come to him by that path, in other forms, as they had been transformed. But somehow, death was still a riddle to him. A riddle which would keep teasing him. He knew that he wouldn't come any further if things would always stay the same. He was on a journey. There was certain food by which the Apeman could turn into another animal, and by which he could even disappear into the nothing. Probably he would travel to the realms of the death then, like the wind. One day the Apeman gave some of this food to Awela, but